That's your cue.
I'm Andrew Basiago, and this is The Quest for Truth.
And my name is Aaron Moriarity. I'll be your moderator. And today is a very special day. Not only is it Andy's Time-Space Anomalies show, number 11 in the series, it's also Andy's birthday. Happy birthday, Andy.
Thank you, Aaron. Yes, today I am 61 years old chronologically, but of course 62 years old or thereabout biologically. And what I mean by that is the elapsed time between my date of birth on September 18th, 1961, and today, September 18th, 2022, is 61 years. But betwixt and between those two goalposts, so to speak, there were those 4 hidden summers that I did in New Mexico with my late father, Raymond Francis Basiago. That's where we teleported to New Mexico on beginning the summer of 1970, 71, summer of 73, accessed from fall of 71, and then the summer of 72, and spent a summer there in New Mexico, and then teleported back to New Jersey so as to arrive about 15 minutes after we had originally left at the beginning of the summer. And as a result, I lived first summers of 70, 71, and 72. And then when I got to the summer of 73, later when we moved to California, that was the second experience of my summer of 73 in California. So I am actually much closer to 62 years old today.
Wow. Wow. That's a lot to keep track of. Boy. Wow.
Yeah. Well, it took me several decades to disentangle the sort of the quantum paradox of what happened and really figure out exactly what times I was in New Mexico and then how those events fell together. And I finally did.
Yes.
Through scrupulous research and analysis of memories and what had happened.
Yeah, and it's amazing what you've been able to untangle over these years. And boy, if anyone has doubts, you can recover memories. Look what Andy did. I mean, it just takes a little bit of diligence and probably a good brain to start with. That probably helps.
Well, you can map a memory and then branch out from there and really reconstruct a lot of your experiences. I mean, I've gone back now 50 years on Project Pegasus and 40 years on Project Mars or more. 42 years from when I began training for Project Mars. So you can do it. Everything's up there. Everything's stored in the engrams in your brain. That's the difference between learning and memory. We remember everything. So memory is, stored in the engrams in our brain. Learning is the ability to go back and access those memories. And that takes more effort.
Yeah.
It's possible.
I'll say I have trouble remembering what I was going to get in the room I just entered. So that's my challenge.
Yes.
So today's episode, Andy, is about Andy's Time-Space Anomalies. Now, what exactly? What is the first one? Is your teleportation slipping incident?
Right. Let's not mention them. Let me first describe.
Okay.
The whys and the wherefores of tonight's show.
Sure.
Okay. Albert Einstein said that imagination is more important than knowledge, and then he went on to clarify that greatly. That's seldom quoted. He went on to say, because knowledge encompasses what we know, but imagination encompasses that which we don't know yet, which will be proved, and that which we will prove never existed. So, that was the goal of my coming forward with my truth campaign in the truth movement. about time travel and our visitations of Mars, or that planetary object that they were exploring whether or not it was Mars. And I was dedicated to first establishing the knowledge of what happened, and then using imagination to figure out the anomalies regarding what happened, so we could learn more about the nature of time-space, the time-space hologram in which we find ourselves, the so-called quantum hologram. But an unfortunate thing happened along the way, and that is our effort to know the truth, to first establish the knowledge before we would then even have the opportunity to ask intelligent questions about what the knowledge implied, or what the questions that the knowledge gave rise to implied, or could possibly imply, was stymied, I think, rather extensively, but what I call the odd. The odd are opportunists, delusionals, and disinformants, ODD, odd. I believe that there is sort of a fictive personality disorder in our common culture where some opportunists just got aboard the opportunity of imitating what truth tellers were saying as charlatans eager to cash in. That's kind of what I mean by opportunists. Others were delusional. They were people suffering from that delusion that when something happens to somebody else, what do you know? They're talking about it happening to them. That's a known psychiatric issue. And then disinformants have been stirring the pot to conceal, and certainly in my case, the three things that the deep state wishes to conceal: the existence of a particular classified program, who was in it, and what technologies were developed for or by that classified project. So in the case of both my time travel memories, which were true experiences that I was sharing with the public, we had, for example, what was it, Apex? There was that sort of science fiction fantasy called Apex, where all these claims about a new time travel every month was a new story. And then the individual who founded Apex, just like the John Titor case, admitted that he was a science fiction writer who had made it all up. And I believe that the same thing is happening in the evolving literature of the secret space program. And I don't want to discuss that at length tonight, but we've had a couple more. So we've got a good 12 or 15 people who are simply either opportunists, delusionals, or disinformants. Their claims cannot be true. And I could spend all my valuable time explaining why, but I just want to make everybody aware of the fact that this seems to be a problem in our culture. It's almost like some adults are suffering from really serious arrested development and are still on an adolescent or even a childhood view of reality. I remember the America where we could enjoy watching the Summer or Winter Olympics and never end up believing we were in the Olympics. And I'm concerned about America because I think there's a lot of that, a disturbing lot. So tonight I was going to go into some of the points I wanted to get to after the true experiences were described that would ask intelligent questions about the mysteries of what happened. So just sitting at my desk here last week, I realized there were 7 really unusual anomalies in time-space that I've encountered during my life, and I wanted to just address those. Now, let's hope that after describing them, they don't become part of other people's narratives. But even though these are entirely new subjects that I'm going to be broaching for the first time tonight, I would predict that if past is prologue, these ODDs, these odds, these opportunists, delusionals, and disinformants are going to be talking about this being part of their experiences in a week or two, because that's what's been happening. It's almost as if a critical mass of adult Americans have lost the ability to hear of somebody's unusual experiences without believing they're their own. And I kind of consider this perhaps an issue of the internet and how it has altered human perception and memory and learning in a way that we should seriously look at as a country. So anyway, that's a night show. We're just looking at 7 of these, and this is to celebrate my, chronologically 61st, but biologically 62nd birthday tonight.
Awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, wow. 61/62. That's
absolutely, because I know that the extra time was compiled. I mean, after all, when you time travel, you age in the ordinary diurnal sense. I mean, you get up, you brush your teeth, shower, comb your hair, whatever, and then while you're in quantum displacement, you are still aging. But then with teleportation-based time travel, we were able to go back to our point of origin only minutes after we had originally left. So all those hidden months in quantum displacement essentially were not traceable. So in that way, time travel was used to disguise time travel. But I aged in the ordinary sense. People have often said, well, wait a minute, Andy. At the end of that summer, you went back to New Jersey so as to arrive 15 minutes before you had originally left. Weren't you that age again? Well, no, there's no ipso facto alteration of age just because you're time traveling. Time travel is travel. If you fly from Seattle to New York City and it takes 5 hours, do you not age 5 hours? Of course. Mm-hmm. So the same thing is true when you are placed in quantum displacement via a form of time travel like teleportation or chronovision or whatever, and then you go back to your point of origin. You're now older, but you're in the original time you were in. So that's why, a number of people in both Project Pegasus and Mars that I knew over the years were actually older than their apparent age. So, for example, in a couple of years before his death in 1990, my father described how he and Raymond Kubik at Parsons sat down and determined how much time he spent in quantum displacement in New Mexico during those years. And it was 8 years. I mean, I was going for months, adding up to a whole summer 4 times. But he was spending like a year there at a time or more. So the number they determined was 8 extra years in quantum displacement. So when my dad passed away in January of 1990, at the chronological age of 66, his biological age was 74. Same thing with Courtney M. Hunt of the CIA, who I worked with in both Project Pegasus as a child and then Project Mars beginning when I was 19 years old. When I met Courtney Hunt in the beginning of the summer of 81, so he could ask me, do you want to go to Mars and all that? And he was the individual who actually took me to El Segundo and sent me to Mars via ARC, Aeronautical Repositioning Chamber. He looked about 50, but in fact, so I figured, okay, Courtney, it's 81. Courtney must have been born in 31. But then about 20 years later, he told me he was born in 1937. So what explains that? The aging was 6 years or so he spent in quantum displacement, where just like my dad and I, he aged in the ordinary diurnal sense. Same thing with my Mars colleague, Bernie Mendez. Bernie claimed that he was born on August 4th of 1956, making him about 5 years and a month older than I, born in September of 1961. But when I was in training for Mars in summer of 1980, I was not yet 19 years old. I was 18. Now, Bernie looked about 35, suggesting he was 17 years older. So he could not have been 5 years older, but he still insists that that is, in fact, how much older than he is than I. So what explains that? Well, he was born in 56, but he spent years in quantum displacement, so he was aging more. So when I encountered him in 1980, he looked older than somebody just 5 years older. So this is an aspect of time travel. You age in the ordinary diurnal sense, and it has an effect on your aging. You age while you're time traveling. Not supernaturally, although there may have also been actual biological syndromes related to the technology. It's entirely possible. My actual age may be closer to 65 in terms of the impact on my health of these devices. And then, of course, there was the prima facie evidence of directed energy weapon attacks against me when I was running for president, and then the year after I ran for president. That hasn't been proven. Some exopolitical theorists have alleged that. I basically said, I think it happened. There'd be motives for that to happen because I was calling for disclosure on time travel, Mars visitation, life on Mars, and ET life in the cosmos. So those remain very controversial positions. So I think I was targeted when I ran using some of those in my 100 proposals as my platform, but we don't know to a veritable certainty whether I was targeted per se with DEWs. But we witnessed some such attacks, and my vision and my kidney function were knocked out at the beginning in those years. So it was probably a combination of what these time travel devices did to my health, and then as intensified by surreptitious attacks on me by the deep state. I would bet that's probably what happened.
Wow. Incredible. So people, you might want to be time traveling, but you're just gonna age a little more. So maybe just enjoy your life, the speed your time is going, and
well, you're going to have more experience. So it's just going to be like any aging. You're not going to be deprived of any life experience. Right. In fact, it's likely that, just as with mine and others, your life experience would be accentuated time traveling. But we don't know of the damage in addition to that ordinary aging that will be sparked by the technological exposures that you get doing so.
Interesting. So what is the first time-space anomaly, Andy, for tonight?
Well, what did I call that?
Mount Weather.
Right, okay, Mount Weather. In 1971, my father drove me from northern New Mexico on that beautiful trip up to southern Colorado, where we went all the way up to the Colorado Springs area. You make a huge turn there, and it's just one of the most beautiful parts of the country, especially in the summer. And he told me he was going to be taking me to Mount Weather. This was one of those acclimational-like trips we were getting inside the military-industrial complex. Mount Weather is Cheyenne Mountain Center near Colorado Springs. It's a kind of a mountain sort of cavernous location with a sort of a concrete wall that says Cheyenne Mountain Center. And we got out of our car right there in the sort of the parking lot in front of it. And we took like this golf cart into Mount Weather. And my dad showed me how the military has these huge maps of Canada, the United States, and Mexico, which track incoming projectiles that could be, nuclear missiles fired by other countries bombing our country. And that what Mount Weather did was it kept us aware of those potential threats to our well-being. It tracked incoming objects, projectiles coming in into our time-space location to protect us from foreign bombardment. But then when we got back on the golf cart-like thing and drove out of Mount Weather, he sort of brought me over to the corner of the parking lot. And he said, son, now that I've shown you this, I want to tell you and ask you to tell the other kids in the program to knock it off. And I said, Dad, what are you talking about? And he said, you know what I'm talking about, son. I want you to knock it off. And I said, no, Dad, I don't know what you're talking about. You just showed me Mount Weather. I never saw that place before. And he said, what we found is that you kids are affecting the equipment here.
Whoa.
And I said, we are? And he said, yeah. He's like really resentful. He was sort of angry at me. And I said, Dad, believe me when I say, look, I have never heard of Mount Weather. I have never been here with you or anybody else. I have never dreamt of this place during lucid dreaming. This is not a place that I have ever been to. And he goes, well, that's not what our evidence shows. And I said, like, what, Dad? What evidence? He said, how about your fingerprints? And I said, Dad, you're telling me my fingerprints are in Mount Weather? And he said, yes. And we found that many of the other kids in the program have also left their fingerprints in this location.
Wow.
Now, today I'm celebrating chronologically my 61st birthday. That discussion with my dad occurred 51 years ago.
Wow.
Last summer. A couple months ago. Like 3 months ago. And Aaron, to this day, I do not know what he was talking about. Now, I do have some ideas. But apparently, as was later described for me by Courtney Hunt of the CIA years later, almost 30 years later,
wow,
around 2000, the year 2000, was that they had detected that something paranormal was happening where these kids around the country who were identified by Project Talent as being extraordinarily intelligent, extraordinarily psychic, or have extraordinary leadership potential, or all three, were leaving the evidence of their presence, including their fingerprints, on dials at Mount Weather that required a tactile sense of touch, that required fingerprints, required the fingers of a human being to turn. And when they investigated whose fingerprints they were, they led back to all of us, because we of course have been fingerprinted before time traveling. Now, what caused that, Aaron, I still do not know. I have some theories. Courtney Hunt told me they had some theories, but nobody ever figured out what was going on in terms of what caused us G&P kids around the country to be affecting America's ability to track incoming projectiles at Mount Weather, the Cheyenne Mountain Center, or just Cheyenne Mountain Center as it was known. One theory is that we were ET contactees, and the ETs had somehow faked our presence to sort of convince our parents' generation to not engage in nuclear war. Another was that because we were traveling in time space, we had some kind of unknown effect on time space where our desire for peace and love in the world and a world without war somehow manifest. But that is one of the time-space anomalies I wanted to address tonight. In fact, the first one.
Interesting.
I was never told by anybody in any need-to-know position, including my father, including Dr. Harold M. Agnew, including Dr. Edward Teller, Dr. Sterling Colgate, Courtney Ann Hunt of the CIA, Major Ed Dames of the U.S. Army, et cetera, what caused that event. And this is where I wanted to get with my truth-telling. But unfortunately, the odd, the opportunists, the delusional, and the disinformants kind of commandeered the discussion. So unfortunately now, after almost 20 years of truth-telling, my ability to contextualize these mysteries and fulfill what Einstein had said, in other words, go into that realm of imagination and discern that which we didn't know which does exist, what we now know will never exist for known scientific reasons, has not yet occurred in the area of applied quantum physics. And that is a net deficit for this country. So I remain happy and proud that I came forward on all this information.
Yes.
Why, for example, would the People's Republic of China make it illegal in China to discuss time travel? Mm-hmm. Could it be they're on the threshold of developing it? Mm-hmm. Possibly. Wouldn't it be better to occupy the high frontier and implement teleportation before a potential foreign combatant?
Sure.
You betcha. But this is the frustration that I'm addressing tonight to celebrate my officially 61st birthday, is let's altogether restore the truth principle. The truth principle is you know what has happened to you, and you try to discern what has happened to others as best you can, but you do not invent life experience.
Mm-hmm.
I just listened to an interview where 3 individuals I know all claimed that they had connections to Project Pegasus that were simply delusional. They were simply fantasists' inventions. Does that advance the truth? Of course not. So, I'd rather not say who those individuals were, but no need to pick on anybody.
I think that discerning minds know, and they can tell. But Andy, as you were describing that, a couple of ideas came to my mind of what could have happened, what could have got you kids there. One is when you were teleporting and time traveling, maybe some dark forces duplicated you guys as you were traveling through these
Hardly possible.
realms, and then used those for nefarious ends to try to stop the program.
To set our government, even in my case, my own father, against us, like we had been malefactors who had done something improper. Yes, that's entirely possible.
Another one that comes to mind, and this, I mean, you'd have to take a leap of faith with Donald Marshall's story, but according to him, these elites can choose anybody, any kid they want, and get the doctor's sample from the doctor of that kid and have them cloned. So I'm thinking.
Well, let's return to that. When somebody has been disproven on their own testimony, we have to treat them as an odd person, an opportunist, a delusional, or a disinformant. Now, in the case of Mr. Marshall, he claimed that Bernard Mendez and I had rescued him on Earth. And when I contacted him and said, Mr. Marshall, the problem with your account of Bernard Mendez and I saving you on Earth is we were never on the same assignment on Earth. We sometimes met on Earth to go up via arc to what they thought was Mars, but we were not deployed together on this planet. And when I said that to Donald Marshall, he said, oh, I'm so sick of you. I'm tired of listening to you. You have no right to say what happened to me. And I said, no, Mr. Marshall, but I have a right to talk about what I and my known colleague, Bernard Mendez, did together. So, unfortunately, Mr. Marshall is what used to be called a crank. He's either delusional or a disinformant or an opportunist or some combination thereof. But he is not a reliable informant because he was alleging something about me that was simply made up. And then when I protested in defense of my life experience, the truth I had shared with the public for years, he grew angry at me as if almost to say, you may think you have a right to tell me what my experience has been, but you don't. And I said, well, when it implicates me, I do. Of course I do. I mean, or, you could tell me you're the emperor of ice cream and I'd be forced to believe you. So he gave an answer that was just zero integrity. And I'm sorry I have to address that, but that's what happened. Just like QAnon claiming that Alfred Weber had done something. And Alfred said, I never did that. In other words, there's a realm of sort of science fiction fantasy that has crept into and vitiated the truth movement. And it just begins with people making up stories, like John Titor.
I'm not familiar with Q. I'm not familiar with Q ever addressing Alfred Lamont Weber in any of the 4,000 plus posts.
He did. He referenced Alfred, and it was just like Donald Marshall's spurious claim of Bernie Mendez and I rescuing him on Earth. It was something that was just invented about Alfred. And Alfred was blowing the whistle saying, listen, at least some of this testimony from QAnon is made up. This is not something I did or have any ability to recognize. It's made up. And those who were adherents to QAnon did not listen to him. But I was there, and I witnessed that attempted confrontation by Alfred Weber about QAnon, but those who were true believers in QAnon did not listen to what Alfred was saying. And so those true believers in QAnon or any other potentially spurious internet-based platform or program, I would recommend reading Eric Hoffer's book, The True Believer, taking 2 aspirin and calling me in the morning. That's the truth of what happened. The same kind of made-up testimony that Marshall made about Bernie Mendez and I, Alfred was blowing the whistle on QAnon, but it was not listened to. So
I just looked up the name Alfred, just the first name Alfred on the QAnon.pub website, and then nothing comes up.
Well, why don't you interview Alfred? Since I remember that happening, what does he remember about confronting QAnon, about a claim that was made about Alfred, that Alfred said, this is not true. They're using my name almost like a meme, because I've got, 1 million members on my
I put Weber in there. There's nothing there either.
Platform.
Now, what the Anons like to remind people is there's no such thing as QAnon. It's Q and then the Anons. So one of the Anons might have said something, but that's not Q saying it. So the Q posts are very specific and very rooted in deep.
Well, maybe I might clarify that by having Alfred on and questioning about what happened regarding that Anon.
All right. I will.
That's the danger of involving yourself in a group platform. You cannot verify everything being alleged by others.
Of course not.
I've been flipping out about that since I had so much vision problem, because I'm relying on people. Like one person agreed to just write what I said, and he began describing himself as my spokesperson. I don't have a spokesperson. I have never had a spokesperson. I've never hired a publicist. I've been doing my own communications on every level. And I had somebody claiming that they were my spokesperson. That was the same pattern we find in this sibling society, as Robert Bly called it in his book, The Sibling Society, on the internet. People are thinking, well, I'm B, I work with A, therefore what B says is something that C can be told about A. And that's never been true. What's true for us, our experience, is what's true. Everything else is what the law calls mere assertion or belief. And the belief is what you apprehend in the absence of evidence. Okay, this is what I've been trying to clean up. So anyway, that's the first mystery that we never got to. I don't think I've ever discussed that before on any of the more than 500 TV shows and radio shows and podcasts I've done for the last 20 years.
That's really interesting.
Radio shows originating in 15 countries, TV shows originating in 6 countries, and numerous podcasts. I've not gotten to posing the quantum mysteries of what my experiences led to. So you just helped advance the truth by giving 2 very credible possibilities to what I was describing, but I've never even discussed this before because we didn't get there. I've been trying to clean up what I've said from the apexes and the false claimants on the Mars front and the whole thing. Germania, as I've come to call them. So anyway, what's number 2?
Okay. Number 2 is teleportation, time slipping. No. That was number 4. Wow. I think
go to my notes, Aaron.
Yes, go to your notes. My notes are jumbled here. Let me see. Maybe these are our. Okay, here it is. I'm sorry. Time slip. 2-minute time slip.
Right. Okay.
Gotcha.
One time, I was at the Sandia National Labs with my dad in 1970 or 71.
Okay.
And he was telling a young physicist, it may have been Stanton Terry Friedman of Canada, certainly looked like Stanton Friedman, about the fact that we were there on a teleportation project. And one of the women on Project Pegasus came to me and said, Andy, you must come with me immediately. And she said, I have to get you through the teleporter by 9 p.m. tonight. My dad would always speak about taking me over to Sandia from like the La Hacienda restaurant where all the project people would carouse at night, have a beer and have a delicious dinner of chili relleno or whatever. That's why I began my love of Mexican food.
Great food.
And she said, in fact, Andy, if you don't go quickly enough, I'm going to have to pick you up and carry you.
Wow.
So we got to the teleport at Sandia. And as I was running through it to get back to New Jersey, by the way, my dad would call that the witching hour. He had to get me back to Sandia or up to Sandia by 9 p.m. in the sense that I'd have to be jumping through the device at 9 p.m.
Wow.
So he would always go much earlier, like 8:45 p.m. Albuquerque time. And we'd go up to northeast Albuquerque and near Kirtland Air Force Base there and go through the the tower there in the front. In those days, it was just one guard with like a 6-shooter. And now it's after 9/11, it's like 2 or 3 guard towers with guards with Uzis, AR-15s. One of them took my keys of me when I went up there in 2008 and actually had me turn around and leave, telling me if I ever came back, I would be arrested by Homeland Security. So anyway, my dad took me up there on time, but he started talking to this young physicist who he was regaling with the fact that we were there on a teleportation program. And he was asking all these technical and scientific questions about how we were doing it. So the lady from the program rushed me to the teleportation room. And as I was running through it to get back to New Jersey, I looked over at the clock, the clock with the sweep second hand and the 2 hands.
Sure.
It's not digital, but what is it?
Analog.
Analog. There was one of those school-like analog, black and white clocks on the wall, and it said 9:02 p.m. That, I believe, was 1971. In the summer of 1980, before I went into training for visiting Mars, my dad approached me in front of our house in Chatsworth, California, and said, I'm sending you over to this painting contractor at the Van Nuys Air Force Base. And I said, why, Dad? He said, you have to jump through the teleporter there. You'll arrive behind one of the buildings at Los Alamos. Some guys will run out of the building. They'll ask you your name, give them your name, confirm your name. They'll then rush you through the building, and you'll jump back through their teleporter, and you'll pop into view in front of that painting contractor out on the grass. And I said, why, Dad? And he said, we need to shave off 2 minutes that you picked up when you were on the program 9 years ago. You've been slipping. And I said, what do you mean? He said, you've been doing something, and then you've been slipping 2 minutes.
Wow.
And I said, Dad, I think I know what you mean, because when I was at Lawrence Junior High School, right after the program ended and we moved to California, I would be standing at my locker with the noise of all the kids and their hubbub, their horse playing around me. And then suddenly they would all disappear, and my ears would ring with the persistence of, hearing their horseplay. And I would go to class, and I would get a tardy, when in fact I was ready to go to class. So I was slipping.
Wow.
Now, the question that was never answered was, why was there that slipping? What was the witching hour? How was it that my dad was able to spend a whole year in
Santa Fe,
New Mexico,
yeah,
but I, just by being there for like 12 hours, had to get home on time? I was never told how that fell together. I don't know what caused the quote-unquote witching hour. And as a result of not going back via teleportation soon enough on that day, especially since I would spend whole summers there, so it might have been 1970 when this accident occurred. How, as a result, I was slipping. But I was literally time slipping. There were other times when I might meet somebody at the Northridge Fashion Center, and they would say, Andy, where have you been, man? I said, what do you mean? And they said, we've been waiting here a half hour. Where are you? And I would say, well, wait a minute, isn't it? I'd look at my watch on my Casio, diving watch, And I go, oh man, sorry, I must have misread my watch, because it was actually a half hour after when I had thought it was.
Wow.
So something was causing slipping from the result of not getting through the teleporter at Sandia on time one night. Do I know what caused that? No. I never knew what the witching hour was. My dad never explained it. Nobody on the project ever explained it.
Wow.
It was some kind of synchrony where maybe the original teleport they used was one that just allowed for a 12-hour visit. You had to jump back to stay in the same position in time space. So that's number 2.
Wow. Interesting.
The time slipping from that 2-minute offset that I picked up by not teleporting quickly enough one night. I know it was 9:02 p.m. that night when I jumped through the device. I looked over at that analog clock on the wall.
Wow. And it worked still?
What's that? The clock?
I mean, the teleporter worked after 9?
Yeah, I got home, but I just, I then spent 6th grade in California, and then on my first full year in school, I went to Lawrence Junior High School in Chatsworth, and I was slipping, standing near my locker and at other times.
Wow.
So I don't know how long that affected me or how broad that got. And we'll see in one of the later examples, it may have really stretched into a bizarre situation. So that was never explored because, again, the point that Einstein made about imagination being more important than knowledge, because imagination encompasses that which we will prove, the universe includes, and that which we will prove cannot ever be included. It's a position we've not got to yet. It's a place that I was trying to get everybody, but it was impeded by those making up false stories.
Yes. Wow. 2 minutes. Well, I know that if I was still in school, I would add that to my reasons for being late. Definitely. Time slip, teacher. Sorry about that. Time slip. Andy, it's courtesy of Andy.
Well, when I was editing the school paper, Chatsworth High, Mr. Spellmeyer of the print shop would be angry at me and would say, "Where have you been?"
Spellmeyer.
And I say, "Mr. Spellmeyer, just got here in time. What are you talking about?" And he would kind of scowl and make a face.
Wow.
I thought that was a great name for a print shop teacher.
Yeah.
Spellmeyer.
It is good. So,
yes.
Number 3, the
Yes.
the RFB duplication incident.
Yes. Summer of 1980, after I did that jump between Van Nuys Air Force Base or Van Nuys Airport area and Los Alamos, and then back again to shave up those 2 minutes, my dad approached me at our living room in Chatsworth. And he walked from the bedroom area of the house and approached me and said, "Son, you're going to be going on a camping trip this year." And I said, "Oh, Dad, really? With who?" And he goes, "Just your dad. It's just going to be your dad and his son." And then before I could even answer, everything reversed, and he walked backwards into the bedroom area of the house, and then the same thing repeated. It was as if my dad's approach about going up to Lake Siskiyou, which would be used as a pretext to involve me in training to go to Mars, somehow stopped, went backwards, and repeated.
Wow.
Within like a 20-second ambit or 30-second ambit.
Wow.
Do I know what happened? No, I never even discussed that with my father before he died 10 years later.
Wow.
It happened. It just didn't have an explanation. And like so many things in life, when something singular happens, we have great difficulty learning it, because while we remember it in those engrams in our brain, we cannot compare it to another similar experience, so we can't retrieve it from our memory. We have not learned it. And I never ended up learning that till I reviewed my experiences. So what caused that is anybody's guess. It apparently had something to do with whatever empirical reality, my father never being drawn into at that time. But do I know to an historical certainty what happened? Absolutely not. It was my dad. Everything reversed. He literally walked backwards, back up the little two-step thing into the living room, and then down the hallway towards the bedrooms. And then it stopped, and he came forward and came out of the bedroom area of the house again and said exactly the same thing to me. So what was going on? I have no idea.
Wow.
But I call that the RFB duplication incident to show that in this weird way, my dad and what he was telling me duplicated at one point. And I have no idea what caused that.
Wow.
But there were other duplication issues associated with Project Mars that we'll explore further tonight.
Wow, that's interesting. That is so interesting. Well, you did say that when you went back to Gettysburg, when you're in that millinery shop, that woman came in and she was talking kind of fast. You couldn't hear her, like she was speeding up and slowing down.
Fast and slow. Yeah, it was going too fast and too slow. That was Eliza Ann Bowen, the wife of the town council president, attorney, and shoemaker, David Kendallhart, also known as David Bowen, her last name. So I don't know how that fell together. But when I visited her grave and put a rose on it, when I went to Gettysburg in 2013, I was deeply moved because I found out the Kendallharts, Mr. and Mrs., were the directors of the Gettysburg station of the Underground Railroad. So probably what she was saying to John Lawrence Burns was, John, you cannot be given this clothing to any wayfaring Union bugle boy who stumbles into town now 4 months after the battle here in Gettysburg, because these shoes, these hats, these jackets are for our fugitive slaves, our escaped slaves. And when I told that story, a couple of times I've gotten choked up that Mr. Burns, John Lawrence Burns, one of the heroes of 1812 and of Gettysburg, as a volunteer, was giving me clothing to protect me from the elements that the Kendallharts intended for escaped slaves from the South on traveling the Underground Railroad to freedom.
Wow.
And because I find our battle against slavery such a remarkably positive thing in our common culture, I just get choked up about that fact sometimes. That's almost certainly what she was saying to him, because that's, in fact, who she was. And when I went to Gettysburg in 2013, the first American to go back to an American town 150 years after he first visited it and put that rose on Eliza Ann Bowen's grave, I went to that millinery shop, and it was still there, and there was still the inequality between the two floors of the space in the store. And instead of a millinery shop, selling hats and ties and tie pins and cravat and scarves and so forth, handkerchiefs, they were selling T-shirts about Gettysburg.
Sure.
Yeah. So I ended up getting like a jacket there in Gettysburg that I'm very fond of. It's a blue winter jacket with just Gettysburg on it in white.
Oh, cool.
And when people ask me, how are you connected to Gettysburg? I say in 1972, I went there in 1863. So a bit of a tie to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
But that's almost certainly what Eliza Ann Bowen was saying to John Lawrence Burns.
Whenever you talk about your trip to Gettysburg, I get a visual image of those size 13 shoes simultaneously decomposing when you would travel back in time. And I'm thinking right now, boy, it would have been cool if you could have kept those and brought those back and say, hey, I'd like to return these.
No, I couldn't keep anything. They were 109 years old, so I was just 109-year-old shoes that were just falling apart.
Wow. Yeah. That's wild. That's wild. Okay, so that's the number 3. Number 4 is the Exxon incident. Tell us about that. Summer of 81?
In 1981, I was working for the second set of employees of Exxon, the Exxon station that was formerly at Devonshire Street and Mason Avenue in Chatsworth, California. Now, that's interesting that they even have such a street corner where there was an Exxon station, because the Duke of Devonshire, I believe of the Cavendish family, was the head of all the Freemasons in the world. At least that's what Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy said when her daughter Kik Kennedy was going to marry the Duke of Devonshire's son, that he was the son of the man who was the director of all the Freemasons in the world. So curious that a CIA agent who had worked on both Pegasus and Mars with me, Courtney M. Hunt, was officially operating as a mechanic at that Exxon station at Mason and Devonshire. Isn't that interesting? And by the way, during that summer that I was there, not only did he said, come on, Andy, do you want to go to Mars? And take me down to 999 North Sepulveda in El Segundo to go to Mars. But the man running the Radio Shack across the street came in and confronted me and said, I don't know what you guys are running in here, but I've got a Radio Shack across the street. I need to operate my equipment. So would you guys knock it off? And I said, sir, I do not know what the hell you are talking about. Why don't you go talk to Courtney Hunt in the garage? So Courtney, as a CIA agent, was using a position as an Exxon mechanic as a cover, just like my dad, working for all U.S. intelligence agencies and military departments, was officially an engineer for the Ralph M. Parsons Company. Everybody in the intel community has three things. They have a company they work for. They have a false name under a branch of the service that they're in, and then they're listed, they're listed by their real name with another department of that branch of the service. So I had a false identity as a lieutenant commander in the Navy, but my birth name was listed with the Naval Investigative Service over in Upland, California, when I was going to Mars. So Courtney M. Hunt was in his day job as Courtney M. Hunt, but he had a false ID. I think he reached level of admiral in the Navy, and I don't even know where his other listing was.
Wow.
But anyway,
I'm
working there, and Courtney is just beginning to have a discussion with me about, do you want to go to Mars? Because I had been trained the previous summer. And when he was, during those first couple of days that summer, two officials from the DOD came in, and I was working the pumps. I was actually working 8 pumps. It was 2 rows of 3 and then 2 more pumps down the hill. And these two officials in these DOD, in these white tailored shirts with DOD badges, came up to me in the pumps and said, are you Andrew Basiago? And I said, yep, the one and only. And they said, can you take us to your boss here? And I said, yeah, just go in there. And Dave Hall is the station manager, and Courtney Hunt is the chief mechanic. Now, I don't think Dave had any connection to the intel community, but he might have. He certainly knew that Courtney was CIA. And one of the people working there actually knew about the space elevators that we were taking to get off planet. So there was something going on with that station.
Wow.
In other words, one of the other employees there knew the phrase space elevator. So these two DOD officials walk in with me to talk and confront Dave Hall, the station manager, and Courtney Hunt, the chief mechanic. And they said, gentlemen, you are receiving official orders today from the United States Department of Defense, from us. And you can see here are our ID cards, that this young man, Andrew Basiago, is to have no contact with electromagnetic or electronic devices, car parts, or any machine while working here this summer. Do you understand what we've told you, gentlemen? I said, yeah, what is this about? And they said, we cannot tell you, but he is to have no contact with electromagnetic or electronic devices, automobiles, parts of automobiles, tools to repair them, things to change the functioning of cars, or anything to do besides standard maintenance of cars. And they said, like what? He said, like oil changes, transmission fluid, wiper blades, air in tires, gasoline, etc. Do you understand what we told you, gentlemen? And they said yes. And they said, if you do anything to countermand this official government order, you will be hearing from us in the Department of Defense and seeing the inside of something called a prison cell. Here are your official orders. And they let them read something, and then they snatched it out of their hands.
Wow.
And I never found out what it was.
Wow.
So somehow, in 81, after they had corrected my 2-minute offset by having me jump from Van Nuys, California, to Los Alamos, New Mexico, the DOD was telling the people I was working at in a gas station to keep me away from electromagnetic or electronic devices. I have never found out why that was so.
Wow.
But that is another one of these time-space anomalies that I had always wanted to get into about my experiences.
Well, as you were talking about that, the Exxon station there in Chatsworth, I looked up the address, and I got a picture of an AMP that's there now. It's called Mason Devonshire Plaza in Chatsworth.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't been there in years. They first built, what was that video shop? Blockbuster Video?
Yeah.
When they got rid of the Exxon station, they built a Blockbuster Video,
mm-hmm.
and then something else. I think it became them a Starbucks.
Okay.
Maybe they put a new plaza there in Mason and Devonshire.
Yeah, looks like
I don't know. I haven't been there since about 2004.
All right. Okay. Oh, that's an interesting one. Wow.
Yeah.
So I wonder what. Well, maybe they found that when you touched something electronic, something happened, and maybe it would. Who knows?
Well, I was having an effect on electronic equipment, like I was just having a telekinetic effect where I'd walk by a microwave oven and it would start blinking.
Yeah.
But I don't know what they knew. I mean, did they somehow link my fingerprints being on dials at Mount Weather 10 years earlier? And since then, I was having a bad hair day and making cars flip up and crash on highways. I don't know.
Whoa.
You know, I don't know what that was about.
Wow.
Never have found out.
Interesting.
And probably never will. So that's what I call the problem of indeterminacy. The problem is we don't know what we don't know.
Right.
And that remains a problem.
Yes.
So I just made my peace with that at 61, 62. I just accepted the fact that when I go on to the next world, some things will be explained, maybe about some people's strange behavior that I was confronted by. But I may be given some explanation for these mysteries, but I don't know. Maybe if I cite them, the spirit guides who meet me on the other side will feel sorry for me and all the weirdness I was subjected to in this life and tell me, oh, the DOD knew that you were having a non-ordinary effect on people's cars and you had already had, bad hair days and flipped a couple of cars on the San Diego freeway with your fingerprints on their cars. I don't, but it happened.
Well, I think that when the day finally comes, when you release the some of these technologies and the limited use of some of them, maybe you can talk them into solving some of these mysteries with the chronovisor and find out what was written on those papers, what their orders were.
Yeah, yes, and I know that the CIA knew that the G&P kids around the country were literally shutting down Mount Weather. How it was occurring, I don't know. But they said there was evidence there in terms of fingerprints for dials that required a tactile sense to turn. So they were really our fingerprints. But I had never been to Mount Weather. In fact, I only went there that one time with my dad.
Interesting.
And he chewed me out. That was what was so weird about serving in Project Pegasus. Imagine you're being chewed out about your dad, and he's acting legitimately angry at you for something wrong you've done in a place you've never been before.
Yeah.
That was the non-ordinary childhood I was living. And my dad was quite sane. Well, he wasn't referring to something that didn't happen or was making up, because Courtney Hunt of the CIA later told me that, yes, we were finding that you G&T kids were leaving your fingerprints on dials on Mount Weather that never should have been turned, but that required a tactile sense to turn. And I think he said we never figured out how your fingerprints were getting there. We figured it was some kind of mind over matter effect.
Weird. Wow. I'm going to be thinking about that one probably for a long time.
Yeah, but who were the guys from the DoD? What was I doing, or what could I possibly do? I mean, I know I was telekinetically affecting microwave ovens all the time, especially during those years.
Really?
And I had driven some Nerf balls across somebody's basement floor when I was in the 6th grade. I had flipped a pop top from a can of Coke with my mind, and one of those light pull tabs from like an apple juice can, and had mind over matter effects. But I wasn't flipping cars upside down that I know of. You know, there were aspects about LA that I hated. Maybe that was being externalized somehow, and my confrontation with the traffic in LA, which intensified when I entered UCLA in 1980, fall of 1980, by summer of 81, was causing non-local effects that were serious. And they thought, God, if we let this kid get anywhere near electronics or electromagnetic car systems, he might blow up Los Angeles or something. I don't know.
Wow.
They were not specific. I just looked at them and then was waiting for them to leave. And Dave and Courtney, confronted me and said, "What's going on, Andy?" And I said, "Hell if I know.
Wow.
I can't even believe this. I'm not doing anything intentionally."
Wow.
So now Hunt remembered that forever. He brought it up a couple times with me.
Endlessly interesting. Wow.
Yeah. Dave Hall I haven't seen since I went back to UCLA that fall. And 300 people who were my former customers asked what happened to that guy, Andy. And Hunt said the CIA investigated that, and they determined that I had had so much contact with elders as a child that by age 19, 20, I was able essentially to become town psychiatrist by manning those pumps at that Exxon station.
There you go. Yeah. Wow.
Which I was kind of doing. I was like everybody's shrink.
Like a bartender.
I was really talking to people about their issues.
That's great. Well, that's pretty cool. So,
but 300 people asked what happened to me when I went back to UCLA. Just as when I was working there, the station managers of the Arco and the Chevron across the intersection came over and said, "I don't know what you're doing over here, young man, like paying your customers kickbacks or something, but we've got to make a living over here," because everybody was always coming to my pumps. And they just weren't going to Chevron or Arco across the street, even if it was wide open.
Wow.
So go figure. Maybe that's what had the DoD interested. They thought, this guy is having some kind of charismatic effect, and we see here he's a future president. That's been found in the Bible code, right? Basiago, president-elect, right? Time travel.
He's spreading too much happiness.
So we've got to keep him away from electronics.
Yeah.
Or electromagnetics.
Wow.
I wish I knew.
That's wild. Well, another mystery that maybe the chronovisor can solve in the future.
Maybe we can go that location, trace those DoD guys back to their car or something.
Yeah. And
figure out what they're saying about what they knew about me, but they never told us. And that's the impedance of not just imagination as defined by Albert Einstein, but simply knowledge by the cult of secrecy upon which the U.S. government is working. Now imagine that. I had served the U.S. government, time traveling for it in childhood. That summer, I would go off planet for it by a form of interdimensional travel. And something about my persona, my energy, my experience, my energy signal, if you will, was causing them to come to my employer and order that employer, both the station manager and the chief mechanic, to literally bar me from having contact with electronic or electromagnetic systems. And yet they were threatening my colleagues, and yet they didn't have the pertinacity to tell me what I was doing or what they were afraid of. Why not? Didn't I have a right to it? They had altered any energy signal I did have. Had they not changed my existence, could they have not been responsible for my current legal blindness and kidney failure? But they came to the station, gave this total bossy order to my two colleagues, who I was on very good terms with, and then didn't tell us. That's the failing of the American cult of secrecy. It is as oppressive metaphysically in our time as slavery was in the time of slavery. We have to get rid of the oppressive nature of the abuse of official state secrecy. I would have been able to take that knowledge to UCLA when I was working with brilliant scientists like Louis Ignarro, who would win the Nobel Prize for the nitric oxide delivery system, just as I predicted to Dr. Ignarro. Dr. Ignarro, if you're listening, I'm Andy, the bachelor's degree working there in the Department of Pharmacology, who predicted your Nobel Prize in biology or medicine. So congratulations, sir. That was a brilliant discovery you made. But I was working with people like Dr. Ignarro in 1983, 4, and 5, and I could have taken it to those gentlemen and ladies at the Center for Health Science at UCLA and said, can you check my energy signal and see what's going on? The DOD was worried about it back in 1981, but by not telling, I just forgot what the very visit. Because it was a singular event, it just slipped in time space into the past, and I chose to kind of forget it for a while.
Yeah, so sometimes it's best to forget certain things, but well, now we have a little memory treasure to look at and wonder about. Another one from Andy, and that brings us to number 5, and that brings us to Arthur Kessler. Okay, the Arthur Kessler incident is very well documented. Here's how it fell together. By the way, I never met Arthur Kessler, although I approached many professional writers when I was an undergrad at UCLA, studying history, but writing for the Bruin, the LA Reader, National Flight magazines, and so forth. So I published my interview with R. Buckminster Fuller from October 20th and 21st of 1981. I did about, 3 months after I first went to Mars on 7/7/81. And I interviewed Bucky on October 20th and 21st. And I then published it. I was very happy as an undergrad. I made $750. When the interview was published by the men's magazine, We. In fact, Linda Blair of Exorcist fame was on the cover. Wow. And in one of the pictorials. A peer of mine from 1961 as it was, but not one I was interested in meeting. And so I was very proud. I showed all my friends. We photocopied that edition, and one of my friends suggested that I ask We to send me the canceled check, the $750, and they did. I think I still have it somewhere in storage. Okay. And it was published. As a result of being published, it was read by the New York City-born, Boston, Massachusetts, residing, really original genius of conspiracy theory that would populate the internet, 15 years later and moving forward. And that individual's name was Ludwig Sherman Ahrens, Arons. He was about a 50-year-old Jewish guy from Brookline, Massachusetts. But he really anticipated all of the conspiracy theory in the literature. He had a couple of publications. One was the Boston Audio News, or BAN. He had the Magnet Tape Broadcasting System, where he was selling audio tapes of luminaries, and a publication called Crux. He then swept it all into a kind of a compendium of things that every intelligent American should have read, which was called The Vital Library. Lud sadly would die after 9/11 when he starved himself to death because he thought that 9/11 was a mass sacrifice to Satan, and he may very well have been right. In fact, he told me they were preparing something for that when he saw the movie Titanic, with all that jumping off the Titanic as it was sinking. Mm-hmm. Didn't we see that on 9/11? People jumping off the Twin Towers in a very similar way. So anyway, Lud contacted me. I was then living in one of the UCLA dorms.
he got my mother's number from the number I had included when I sold that article to We, and she gave the front desk of the dorm I was living in, and there was a note from Ludd in my pigeonhole at that dorm. He was staying with his wife, Sally, in a condominium in Marina Del Rey, California. And I spoke with him on the phone, and he said, Andy, you have renewed my faith in America's young people. You're kind of, where young people were at in the 60s. And that was quite a compliment, just like when Reverend Carla Augusta Friedrich said that I reminded her of Jim Morrison. And I said, Reverend Carla, you have given me the greatest compliment that you could give me. That's what I've been trying to do, is wake people up to what the world includes and can include. And, as Brian Epstein of the Beatles said, we're either a warning or an inspiration. I've tried to be bold, but especially an inspiration. So on Halloween 1982, I drove over to meet with Ludd and Sally. And we were talking about a lot of things. And I noticed he had a bank of audio tapes, of cassette tapes on a wall. And I looked over there, and one of them was like 2 volumes of an interview with John Lennon. So he was kind of collecting interviews of luminaries, and he asked to record, do a tape-to-tape on my interview of Fuller. And I said, sure, the articles come out. Even if you want to sell this, Ludd, you're doing good work, sell it and advance your venture here. This is really a good project you're doing. Because it really was. I saw, he was really trying to give people enhanced audios of really important interviews. And in fact, he had one with Arthur Kessler. So anyway, we were talking about a pattern of assassination since World War II. And we talked about the obvious ones: JFK, RFK, MLK. And I think I told him that Courtney Hunt of the CIA had shared with me the fact that the CIA had in fact killed Jimmy, Janis, and Jim, namely Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, and Jim Morrison. And Ludd said to me, being a real original conspiracist, he said, I wonder who else they've killed. And I said, well, I know because I was Doc Hammarskjöld in my last life that they shot my plane down. He said, how do you remember that? How do you know that? And I said, I remember hearing something hit the bottom of the plane. And then I was thrown from the wreckage, and these individuals came over. They were white men and shot me to death at point blank range. We now know those were Rhodesian mercenaries who killed Hammarskjöld. So if I wasn't him, at least somehow I have his memories. Interestingly, I was born like an hour after he died.
Wow.
On September 18th, 1961,
wow,
which we celebrate today.
Happy birthday.
So anyway, yeah, thank you. So Ludd says, geez, Andy, I wonder who else it was. And I said, well, so I said, and Ludd, what about Arthur Kessler and his wife? And he said, what did you say? And I said, Ludd, what about Arthur Kessler and his wife? And he said, what happened to them? And I said, well, I was just reading a news magazine over at UCLA about a week ago, and it said that Arthur Kessler and his wife had died in a murder-suicide, like one shot the other and then shot themselves. And he said, Sally, come in here. I want to hear Andy say something. I want you to hear something Andy's saying. So Sally came into the room where Ludd and I were talking. He said, okay, Andy, would you say the same thing? And I said, well, Sally, Ludd and I were talking about people who have been assassinated since World War II, that maybe it wasn't just, JFK and RFK and MLK, but maybe 10,000 people. And he said, and then what did you say? And I said, Ludd, what about Arthur Kessler and his wife? And Ludd said, did you hear that, Sally? She said, yep. Now, what I found out happened, I discussed a number of years later with Ludd, is that Arthur Kessler and his wife were not dead. Yet I had read of their death in a popular news magazine. It was like in the milestone section of Time.
Mm-hmm.
And it said, dead, murder-suicide, Arthur Kessler and his wife, blah, blah, blah. So when Ludd asked me, well, how did you know that, Andy? I said, Ludd, without question, I remember reading it over at the undergraduate research library at UCLA. I had time to kill before class, and I went into the undergrad research library, and I picked Time or Newsweek off of the shelf there, sat down in one of the easy sofas, and read from that news magazine. And he said, well, was there anything unusual about that time? I said, yeah, Lud, I got very kind of feverish, it's like I was under some kind of external influence, and I said, maybe a time shift. So that's another time-space anomaly. When I mentioned that to Lud Aarons and I know it was Halloween of 1982, because before Lud and Sally wished me a good night, and I think they actually drove me home to the UCLA campus because a friend had dropped me off at their place. They said, if you go out in your car up to dorms, or if you have one, or with your friends, remember the little kiddies going trick-or-treating tonight. So I know it was 10/31/82. And that corresponds to exactly the month when my interview with Fuller was published in We, the magazine. So that was like 4 months before the Kessler's death. And I had remembered reading it. So what does that mean? Whatever was going on when I read that in a news magazine at what is now known as the Charles E. Young Undergraduate Research Library at UCLA, I was about 3 or 4 months in the future. Now, the only connection I've been able to find to Project Mars is that my colleague William Whitecrow, who was originally named William Paris, said to us that everybody involved in Project Mars was operating in 2 different dimensions. So maybe that was some kind of offset caused by that. But it remains a time-space anomaly. Lud Aarons is dead, hasn't been around for 21 years. I haven't talked to Sally since I called her about his death, or found out he was dead. She had divorced him because he had become irascible. And I have no way of verifying even the event happened, but it did. So what happened? We don't know. We know it was a time-space anomaly. This implies that either those who time travel can be dislocated spontaneously from one timeline to another, or we all can be. And I've talked to many people who have had time slips. So that's my most prominent time slip. I literally read a news article about an event in the future. It had to be a time slip 4 months into the future.
Wow. That's really interesting. By the way, if you ever get a vision of lottery numbers, give me a call. And
well, I had a dream that I was picking up lottery numbers, or just numbers, and then played with the lottery when I was studying law up in Portland. And I went by a plaid pantry, and I played 2, 4, 9, 22, 26, 39. And it was $5 with 10 guesses. And as I was coming out of this convenience store plaid pantry, right near my apartment near Gabriel Park in Portland, I looked at the third row of numbers where it said 2, 4, 9, 22, 26, 39, which I think was the top number. It was pick 6 out of 39. That was the Oregon megabucks at that time. Maybe it still is. And I looked at that row of numbers and said, whoa, to myself, you should have played multiples of 7 here. This should have been at 28. And I turned around to go back into the plaid pantry to buy one more ticket to play that row with 28 rather than 26 in it. And I said to myself, no, Andy, there's no way it's going to be a winner. Aaron, if I had done so, I would have won $15.9 million.
Well,
that was the biggest lottery winning in Oregon history at that point, which was July of 1991.
I'm going to start working on a plasma confinement chamber to take us back to that moment to have you get that ticket, because that would be
nice to be loaded.
That would be
one
great.
thing that is amazing about my life. People will agree with me when they read my biography. Is for some reason in this life, I was given the opportunity of experience, but not something as equally estimable, known as access to capital.
Right.
I have been beggared of everything I've earned.
And yet,
Does not make sense.
you
Like
were
a curse.
you were voted most likely to succeed too. Right?
I was voted most likely to succeed and most respected
Yeah.
of the 1,000 graduating seniors at Chatsworth High School in 1979.
Well,
And I have succeeded in experiential terms,
yes.
but there is a disconnect in America between public service and access to capital.
Yes.
Many of the allopathic doctors, for example, are skipping out on their patients. You ask them a direct question, and they say, oh, no, you have to ask a blah, blah, blah. They never want to share their knowledge because I'm convinced that many of them do not have sufficient knowledge to be doctors, to be physicians.
Mm-hmm.
But just a personal matter.
Well, I do still pay the hope tax. I still do buy lottery tickets. Maybe I'll play those numbers. And
Well,
I'll split it with you if I win.
no.
How's that sound?
Yeah.
I'll split it with you if I win.
Yeah, it doesn't pay if you don't play. So if it actually makes more sense though to save your lottery amounts wage for the big jackpots, because you'll have like 2 or 3 out of X rather than just 1 out of X all the time. Okay? So it makes more sense to actually play lottery tickets, but strategically, and just go for the big jackpots.
Right.
Because you have more chances within that draw. So that's a mathematical truth that I'm happy to share with everybody on my birthday.
Interesting.
Don't play every jackpot. Play the big ones.
Only the big ones.
So take your estimated money that you can afford to lose, like $50 or $25 or 10 or 5 or 1 or whatever, and only play the big jackpots.
Only play the big ones. Good advice.
Yes.
Good advice.
Yes.
Well, that brings
That
us.
is a mathematical certitude.
That
You
brings.
know how that works, Aaron?
How does that work?
Well, if you buy the same number of dollars of tickets, but you pony up all those on the same draw, you are increasing your chances of winning that draw.
Mm-hmm.
And your goal is to win a jackpot,
Right.
not every jackpot.
Right. So
you're actually increasing your odds by, like Mark Twain said, put all your eggs in one basket and watch that basket. Put all your lottery dollars in one draw periodically and watch that draw.
Interesting. Wow.
Yes, that's a mathematical certitude. That is axiomatic mathematically. And I just explained it.
Excellent.
In other words, if you spend $25 on one draw rather than 5 on 5 in a row, you've got 25 chances out of X. When you do play, and all the other ones, you're just repeating the 5 chances out of X. See?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
5 times. And you have the same odds each time. Separate odds. Yeah.
So if you pay the hope tax like I do, take Andy's advice, and maybe you'll be.
I would recommend the book Innumeracy by John Allen Paulos, Paulos. Dr. Paulos may discuss that in that brilliant book. That is a matter of overcoming innumeracy. That spending $5 5 weeks in a row is less advantageous than $25 once during that 5-week period.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, so what's next?
What's next is the law library incident, 89-81.
Yeah. I then went on from UCLA, class of 84, worked for 4 years, and went to Lewis and Clark Law School in Portland, Oregon, where I almost won the lottery in 91. In 1988. By 1989, individuals who knew me at Lewis and Clark began saying to me, Andy, when you came to the law library today, why didn't you come over and say hi, or what was going on? And I said, I wasn't, but it was being reported. So this is the phantom doppelganger type sighting that I've taken accounts from many people. There seems to be something in the universe that is sometimes, for example, sending our persona to somewhere where we're thinking of visiting. And I call that the law library incident.
Wow.
I would say, look, listen, I was at my apartment near Gabriel Park all day. I did my laundry. I went grocery shopping. I cleaned up my apartment. And then I studied and even rewrote some of my notes because today is my day off. Or, yesterday, Tuesday or whatever, was my utility day, as I called it. So I was not in the law library.
Wow.
So who you saw is anybody's guess, but it wasn't me. And they would say, well, it sure looked like you. And I was not delusional. I was under a lot of sleep deprivation in law school. But in order to get to the law school, I had to drive down up 45 to Multnomah, left on Multnomah, and go about a mile, and then go across Highway 5 and get off at exit 297 and go all the way up Terwilliger Boulevard to Lewis and Clark, and then find a parking space, which was difficult because we didn't have enough parking spaces. And then I had to park and walk into the law library, often after visiting my locker. And it took a good 15 minutes to do that. So it was not me. So who they were seeing is anybody's guess, but it wasn't me. And it happened a lot. It's almost as if I would say, well, I was thinking about law school when I was studying at home today. Maybe I astrally projected, or my appearance went there or manifest there. I don't know. But that was another time-space anomaly. It was reported not by numerous, but quite a number of classmates, maybe about 5. All of them from different backgrounds, different races, different genders, different backgrounds professionally from different areas of the country. One from Hawaii, one from Oregon, one from China, one from New Jersey, and so forth. So it had to be going on. And different classes, because I knew a number of people in the grade above me, for example, like the brilliant Brad Avakian, who would become everything in Oregon government except governor. Brad was one of the people who saw me in the law library when I wasn't there, but that's just a measure of the fact that I had a lot of friends in law school. So I don't know what's going on.
That's really interesting. Well, you've told us now that there were times where you were in 2 places at once, like the summers, you were in 2 different places. Maybe when this was happening, some dark elements grabbed a duplicate of you and some of the other kids and
well, when we walked in Pegasus, we walked around that rectangular gate, and there was a gate on each side of the rectangle, and then we saw images of ourselves walking ahead of us, and when they had us run towards ourselves, the images of us ran forward. I guess it's possible that after I got settled there studying law, the other version of me was showing up for some reason. Possible.
Yeah.
That's the only explanation I have ever really conjectured of why there could have been literally a doppelganger. If that was ahead of me, maybe it's because I was then going to go over to the law library, and the version of me ahead of myself was ahead of me. Entirely possible.
Yeah.
But that means there's some version of me out there that has said and done things that I haven't said and done. And that disturbs me. So maybe we'll find more out about that someday.
Yes, let's hope. That's very interesting. Wow, law library incident, your doppelganger.
But see, this is the danger of the abuse of official state secrecy. What it did, and I discussed this with Dr. Jean Maria Rigo, the brilliant social psychologist, they created teams involving incredible specialness training and esprit de corps. And then they shoved us off deck and did not communicate with us and did not give us critical information about our experience. If they had properly, I might be cited today. So this is an injustice that as United States Senator or Vice President or President, I will rectify. We need to correct America from doing this. It is not working. There are all kinds of examples I could make, but as long as secrecy rules the day and not truth, we are being injured. Yes. And I invite anyone to think of what I'm actually referring to that was of recent, we know content in our culture.
Yes.
But this is the damage that secrecy has done to America.
Yes.
Even allowing absolutely indefensible things to be called something they're not with unknown side effects. So I won't say more, but there you have it.
I think we know exactly what you're talking about. And
yes.
I couldn't agree more with you. Yes. The next one.
So basically, those are Andy's Timespace Anomalies.
Wait.
I've spoken to many people who have had time slips, who have gone somewhere, and then an hour later found themselves driving the same location, or being home too quick or too late, and so forth. They're very common. There was one incident where one of my siblings saw me at a Chinese restaurant in San Diego where I had an incident involving eating some Chinese peppers that my dorm mates at UC San Diego gave me in 1980. And then after telling me that, about a year later, she said, I never met somebody there who I thought was you. And I said, you told me about it. That he said his name was Michael, and he looked just like me, and he sounded like me. And when I found out about doppelgangers, is all of us have 11 absolutely similar doppelgangers in the world.
Wow.
They look exactly like us. They sound like us. They literally look and sound like the same person.
Wow.
And then you ask them their name and what they do for a living, and it's always different. But I've sat in airports all over the United States and in other countries and sat there and gone, oh, that one looks like that person from high school, and my law client over there, and that person I interviewed, and that broadcaster whose podcast I've appeared on. And I've just sat there and watched all these doppelgangers. There's a lot.
There are. I've noticed that too. It happens a lot when you move to a new place. Now, the last one.
There's something only like 10,000 phenotypes, 10,000 basic types.
Well, it makes sense that there would be more of one of each of us because, to us, squirrels all look the same, but they don't look the same to each other as much. So it makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, the last one here is the UCSD, University of California, San Diego.
Here's an example of it.
San Diego.
In 2000, I was able to use the internet to find about 5 classmates of mine from UC San Diego, where I was 1979-80. That's where I spent my freshman year of college before I was trained to go to Mars.
Wow.
The next summer of 80, and then went there in July of 81. So I was interested in talking to these guys. I found about 5 or 6 of them. And what I found, to my astonishment, is they all remembered me, and they confirmed everything I remembered about what had happened during that year of school, but the roles played by each of them had been transposed. And I've talked about this. I think the only thing that would explain this is that when we're having so-called joint experience, common experiences with others, we are in what Buckminster Fuller called only semi-overlapping realities. And then as years pass, those realities actually pull apart. So we were in, what novelist John Knowles called a separate piece. We have literally been in separate packets of time space. That's what I think is going on.
Wow. Wow.
So, they just were remembering everything, but the roles had changed.
The roles had changed. Interesting.
Well, the same things happened, and they reported it, but who claimed credit for being in the memories of what happened changed, almost in every instance.
Wow.
Then I called the registrar at UC San Diego, and initially she couldn't find any of these people. That was a mystery.
Wow.
Why were there no records of all those guys?
Interesting.
That was a time-space anomaly, as they were confirming that year as common, UC San Diego students, and literally living in my suite in Tenaya Hall, Muir College, UC San Diego. But what they said had happened changed location and time space.
Wow.
It was the same things that happened, but to different participants. So it was like, with the passage of time, the time streams pulled apart, and they had literally been in different pasts. That's what the evidence suggested. Now I've tried to find any of those gentlemen, and I've been totally unable.
Wow.
It's like they've gone off planet or into another dimension. I don't know.
Interesting.
But this is another pattern of what I call indeterminacy. And one of the things that's intensifying indeterminacy in America is that people are only talking about what they want to talk about, not what others are asking them to confer about. So I think we have to become a little bit more Christic as a people and engage in a little bit more traditional pattern of common courtesy to take phone calls and indulge people's inquiry, at least for a short period of time. The people that I know who are enlightened and aware do that, but then there's a pattern of wackadoodles kind of abusing that, as I discussed at the outset of one of our previous episodes of The Quest for Truth. So it's a delicate balance, but generally as a common culture, in a country where by 1992, half of Americans were living alone, half of American adults were living in single apartment and residences, just one person.
Mm-hmm.
We have gotten to a place where we're not conferring about the nature of reality. And as somebody who has aspired to the U.S. presidency, that bothers me. We need to communicate to, as Captain Cousteau said, take our inspiration from the dolphins and gather together to protect ourselves from common threat. For example, sharks.
Mm-hmm.
There are sharks on Earth and undoubtedly in space. We have to become a more co-creative world, and especially here in this country, if we are going to save ourselves. And that's the message that I want to leave everybody with on my birthday tonight. Please think about that and how we can only learn beyond our own experience by understanding the experiences of others, to do as the Russians said, to eat bread and salt and speak the truth. And we're not doing that. We're losing that opportunity. I think we should take our inspiration from Get Together by the Youngbloods. So please, everybody, play that for me tonight. Or maybe somebody can even post it on Andy for America in honor of my birthday. Get Together by the Youngbloods. I believe that if we are going to heal ourselves, even from the last 3 years of dissolution, we have to get together as a common co-creative people. That doesn't mean we have to like everybody. That doesn't mean we have to insinuate ourselves into each other's lives. It just means we have to be a little bit more open to not being down on what we're not up on, and learning of other people's experiences. Because everything I've been sharing about time travel and Mars visitation has been true to an artisanal effort I've made to describe exactly what happened. And there are still people who've known me for years who do not believe what I'm saying.
Wow.
Because they arrive at their findings based on their beliefs rather than their beliefs based on their findings. So let's begin with the message of Get Together by the Youngbloods, and then recognize that doing so will get us over certain challenges as one co-creative people, e pluribus unum, from many, one. That's the direction it's supposed to go. Not from one, many. And I'm afraid that's the America that we're getting, is the opposite of e pluribus unum. So anyway, that's my message tonight, and those are the 7 of Andy's Timespace Anomalies that I would put out there tonight. And I predicted that it'll soon be incorporated in other people's imagined or confabulated memories. Problem.
We'll
One of the
find out.
problems. But let's, if anybody would like to discuss ideas for these in future shows when we have a call in, I would be happy to entertain those ideas.
Awesome.
So that's all I wanted to discuss tonight.
I just have to let you know, Andy, before we sign off, that everyone in the chat has been wishing you a happy birthday. And
Well, thank you.
and we want to thank you again for doing these. This is a great public service to the truth.
Yes, every day is a day that should get us closer to ascension. If we seek enlightenment, righteousness, love, compassion, mercy, humility, wisdom, and live in service to others rather than service to self. As Jesus of Nazareth said, if you follow after me, you will become like me. What did he become? Ascended. What was Thomas the doubter doing? Sticking his hand in Jesus' side. Why? Because he was transparent. He had overcome sickness, injury, pain, death, because he existed, but he was no longer a physical, corporeal being. So for those of you who have lost faith in life, it all matters. It's all an opportunity to get closer and closer to ascension. What a beautiful thing. What a great gift from our Creator God and His Son Jesus. So anyway, that's my message tonight, is just play get together for the young bloods, and let's make that of America. Let's not lose this great country because we're not living for others. We're only living for ourselves. That's what I'm afraid we're seeing. And I think it really impacted us negatively recently. But I won't say in what context, or the government of this country will block this podcast.
Right.
Let's not allow that.
Yes. Thank you again, Andy, and happiest of birthdays to you. Happy birthday.
Thank you, Aaron.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
All right. Good night, everyone. Thank you very much.